The original Devil May Cry was okay, but nothing that spectacular in my opinion. So I wasn't exactly looking forward to Devil May Cry 2, as apparently it had gotten a much less positive reception than the first game, so I braced myself for the worst. And I ended up being rather baffled, because I liked Devil May Cry 2. In fact, I liked it even more than Devil May Cry 1, and I only became more confused after I looked up the issues people had with the sequel. One of the main issues people had with it was that it was too easy, but playing through both of them, I didn't really notice that much of a difference in how hard they were to play. Reading between the lines, I'm assuming that this means that the masochistic crowd, that for whatever reason likes games to feel like a grinding chore akin to banging your head against a wall, weren't happy with it. But for normal people, the game is still reasonably challenging, and there are harder difficulty modes, so I don't really see the problem. Another common complaint was that the combat was less refined. In some ways I get where they're coming from. There's less weapon variety, and for large parts of the game it's feasible to just wail on the enemies fairly mindlessly. But the controls feel more fluid than they did in the first game, the combat is still fun, and while a lot of the enemies are fairly easy to beat individually, they usually attack in groups, and there's much more variety when it comes to both the normal enemies and the boss encounters. There is some recycling of enemies and maps, but it's not as blatantly noticeable as in the first game. Or at least, it's not if you only played Dante's campaign. There's a second campaign where you control a new character called Lucia, and that campaign definitely does blatantly reuse a lot of stuff from Dante's. I'll give it a little credit in that it's not exactly the same, and there are some new features in areas that weren't in Dante's campaign, but it does feel pretty derivative. If you're just looking at Dante's campaign though, the game avoids repeating itself to the extent of the first game. I also like how dodging is handled in this game, as it feels more natural and easier to pull off than in the first game. When it comes to the boss battles, almost all of them have really cool designs. When it comes to fighting them though, it's a bit of a mixed bag. A lot of them are genuinely fun to fight, and do require at least a degree of strategy, but others are just a drag, as they're not hard but have obscene amounts of health, and so take forever to die. Overall, I will admit that the boss battles in the first game were probably better, but I wouldn't say that they were significantly better, and Devil May Cry 2's bosses are still pretty good. And finally, one of the biggest complaints was with the story and the characters. To be fair, the story and characters are incredibly bland and forgettable, but I thought the same thing about the first game, so I don't really see much of a downgrade in this area either. Honestly, I'm not really seeing how Devil May Cry 2 is that bad a game. I guess a lot of people really fell in love with the first game and saw it as a masterpiece, and as a result ended up feeling like Devil May Cry 2 was a major letdown due to the ways it differentiated from the first game. But personally, I didn't get that into the first game. I thought it was just okay. Devil May Cry 2 does have a bit of a slow start, and takes a while to get going, so it's possible many of the people who dislike it never finished it. And hey, I can't blame them. If a game doesn't win you over near the beginning, not continuing is a perfectly understandable response. But speaking as someone who played through and finished both games, I can say that overall I had more fun with Devil May Cry 2. I don't know, maybe I'm just weird. All I can say is that, in my opinion, Devil May Cry 2 is nowhere near as bad as many people build it up to be. My final score is a 6 out of 10. Yeah, the same score I gave the first game. As I said, neither of the DMC games really won me over, and I'm not really a big fan of hack and slash games, so if you do like hack and slash games, then take what I have to say with a grain of salt. We'll have to see what 3 does for me. So what do you think? Have you played Devil May Cry 2? Did you like it, or do you think I'm crazy? Whatever you think, be sure to let me know in the comments below. If you like what I do, feel free to subscribe and follow me on Twitter. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.